even when all the previous issues and the absconding was thrown into the mix, it still wasn't enough. So much evidence must have been lost in those first months. So much. What is very difficult to take is it's not like they weren't being told. It's not a case of simply saying, well, there's nothing on his record. That's irrelevant. A concern has been raised. What was wrong with ruling it out?
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. A woman reported killer Johnny Creswell to the PSNI in 2016, 4 years before he murdered Katie Simpson, after he had exposed himself to her at a horse yard in County Antrim. The victim told the PSNI that he was dangerous, had threatened her boyfriend, and had boasted about the horrendous violence he'd doled out to his ex-partner, Abigail Lyle. Yet no prosecution was brought and nothing was found on file about the incident when Creswell brought Katie to hospital in 2020. Today I'm talking with journalist Tanya Fowles about the ongoing revelations about Creswell and his shocking catalogue of abuses of women within the equestrian industry. This is Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com. Tanya, the ongoing saga about the investigation into Jonathan Creswell, despite his death, there's constantly things moving within this overall poor investigation, I think we could say by the PSNI. But you have a story which shows really, it sort of really questions what the Chief Constable John Boucher had to say in relation to nobody speaking up in the years that Creswell was active.
That's right, yes. It was actually after your last podcast on the issue. I received quite a lady called me who was quite nervous. And she said, I reported him in 2016 and nothing was done. So I think it took a little bit of time to get her to understand that I would try to do my best. So once we got over that, told me the whole story about how she came with her partner, and we're calling her Sarah and we're calling him Ian. That's not their real names or any variation of their names. It's just there is a sexual element to this, so she's entitled to that anonymity anyway. So Sarah and her partner go to work in stables in Antrim. They're exceptionally well versed in horse world. They're very, very good at their jobs, but they're only there. And bear in mind, this is a couple. They're only there maybe 2 or 3 days, where Creswell also works. And he's quite established there. He's been a member of staff for quite a while. And he begins to tell Sarah about being in jail. And this was roughly 2015. Mm-hmm. And of course, he was in jail for the horrendous attack on Abigail Lyle. And he began to talk about how he had done this. And Sarah said he was proud of it. He boasted of it. He found it quite funny. He used very derogatory language. The point is, he didn't deny it. He was making use of something which should have been a real lesson to him.
And of course, Tanya, to remind anybody that doesn't recall, it was 2008 when he began a relationship with Abigail Lyle, who was a show jumper from Bangor. In 2009, I think the August of that year, she was removed from his house by a member of the police and a sort of a domestic violence liaison officer. And she went on to give a 19-page statement about a catalogue of abuse at the hands of Jonathan Creswell. She told of a number of occasions when he beat her in the car. She was beaten black and blue. And she told in particular of one horrific time that he brought her to the woods, the forest in Castle Leslie, and beat her over a prolonged period of time and really frightened her. I think she thought she was going to die. He was charged and he pleaded ultimately guilty to 6 offences, separate offences around his treatment of Abby. And she had also then spoken out she was working with the domestic violence charity, I think, am I right, up in the north? And she had given She'd given a very detailed interview about it. So it was very high profile. He had only served 3 months in prison, had got back out of prison and had been welcomed back into the equestrian world as if he'd done nothing. So that's the background to that. So fast forward to 2015, he's in a yard in Northern Ireland where he's working, and this couple come to work and he begins to boast about that.
He boasted about what he did, and it was his previous partner, and that he went into extremely minute detail. And this is what struck me about Sarah, because some of the detail of that case was just too severe to report. There's no doubt about it. And it was distressing for Abby as well. So some information was held back, but only a very few people know that detail. One of whom, of course, would be Creswell.
Right.
He knew what he did, and he was able to tell Sarah, who didn't know Abby, has never met her, wasn't even in the country at the time that happened, and he was able to set out exactly to her, and she relayed that back to me, and I didn't doubt her to begin with, but I knew she was completely genuine. And this was the forerunner to several days later. She's crossing the yard, and he calls her, and swings around, and he drops his trousers, exposes himself fully, and says, "Do you want me to show you what to do with this?" She's disgusted by this, especially as she works with her partner. That didn't seem to bother Johnny. Mm-hmm. So she tried to report it to the yard owner. Nothing came of that. But it went on, and her partner, Ian, then challenges Johnny. Doesn't sort of pull out pistols at dawn or anything, but it was just, this isn't going to happen. And Johnny absolutely took in to Ian. He really, fortunately, Ian recorded the whole interaction, because they'd come to realize how dangerous this guy was. So he tells Ian that he will snap his neck and break his back. So those are threats, very, very serious threats. And he then refers to Sarah as his expletive girlfriend, will get what's coming to her. Now, at this point, nobody comes on board to help. There is nobody. The yard turned away. Not only turned away, they all went off and crowded round Johnny. He was the man of the moment. These two obviously were not part of the gang, and the workplace became unbearable, and the couple left. Now, they'd no new jobs to go to. They literally left with what they had on their backs, later found other work, and in the new year, having settled down, they thought, he's going to do something like this again if he's not done it already, and took the decision to go to the police. Nice. And Sarah reported in great detail everything he had said, how she was left feeling, and she stressed in that when she was talking to police, and she said they were good, that they worked well with her, she said, he is dangerous. Mm-hmm. So she feels a little bit more comfortable. Ian also provided his phone with the content that was contained in that, and they go about their life.
And Tanya, had he videoed him when he was threatening him? Or had he just voice recorded him?
I think it was an audio recording. That I haven't that full detail. I just know that the police held onto the phone.
Yeah.
So time passes and nothing comes of it. And suddenly, without any preamble, Sarah is contacted by the police and said, your statement's going to be used in the Katie Simpson murder. And it took her back, and she's, I don't know what you mean. What happened? That case got nowhere with it. Mm-hmm. And they tried to explain, I suppose, as best they could, the detail in it. And she was very confused, very angry. Nothing had been done about her. Delighted that it might be of use to Katie's case. No issue there. But she couldn't understand. So she put a complaint into the Ombudsman because she felt the PSNI had not properly investigated her case. That came back with quite a detailed breakdown, which set out how the police tried from the 2016, pretty much most of 2016, to apprehend him. There was an alert put out that he was wanted for questioning in terms of an alleged sexual assault. There were Police were told of what cars he would be associated with, who he ran with, who he knew, and they attended various events that they thought he might be at. No joy. So they then send a file to the PPS, and in 2017 they said case closed, no case to answer, or no prosecution. Okay. So naturally Sarah thinks that's it over. But the minute she mentioned to me about an alert, I thought, well, that ties in, because I was aware of another issue in which he had not turned up for motoring matters in Tyrone. And I mentioned this when I rang in to police on the 4th of August, the day after Katie was admitted to hospital. But they said, no, there's nothing here. And as time went on, we then learned his previous wasn't even there. Some motoring matters were, but not this. So where did that alert go? Or maybe it did fall off when they said no prosecution, but nobody told Sarah. And she suddenly is then told her statement has been resurrected and is going to be used. So we then find a little deeper that they couldn't find him because he was supposedly in the Republic of Ireland.
And that detail is in a bail hearing when he is in custody. He's looking for bail. He's been charged with the murder of Katie Simpson. He's going to defend himself. He seeks bail, and the detail is there that he is a flight risk because before around 2016, I think it's detailed, they were looking to speak to him and he was outside the jurisdiction.
That's correct. That's something that jumped into my head, that this was raised by the PPS, who said, no, he did a runner, but well, in parlance, obviously, he did a runner before when he was wanted over an alleged sexual matter, and he couldn't be found. Now, that alone concerns me because this was pre-Brexit, so there was always the European arrest warrant. They could have gone for that. It would have been much more straightforward than what we have now. But nonetheless, the judge picks up on this and says there's a risk of absconding over the border. And this is exact transcript from that hearing, where he went on a previous occasion, and they then have the defence saying, oh, I can answer that. I can answer that perfectly. Yes, he did go over the border. He went to live with his father, but he was back up in that Antrim yard on a daily basis. Now that is on the record in High Court. Why was that not flagged at the time? Are we being told that he just slept in Donegal and he drove up every day to the yard in Antrim? Obviously now clearly aware the police were interested in talking to him, but nonetheless, nobody got him. And Johnny slipped through the net once again.
And the point of this is, of course, that this was a very serious allegation that was made in 2016. And I suppose were proper efforts made in order to question him about that at the time? The fact that PPS decided not to prosecute comes in the aftermath of the police believing it to be so serious that they have an alert issued for him. And yet, are we led to believe that they don't go back to his workplace to see if he's there?
Well, if he was, as his barrister on that day said, if he was in that yard on a daily basis, driving up and down, surely they would have caught him once, you know. And then they say they're speaking to other people who he associated with. We'll even put him back in Donegal. A lot of the people that Johnny associated with were still in touch with him. There's any amount of photographs of events and hunt balls where they're all standing with him, including some of his co-accused. So they all knew where he was, but nobody could find him. It's not adding up.
So just in general, the concerns you have at this stage, and other people have, centre on the PSNI and whether, well, firstly, I mean, the investigation into Katie Simpson is something that is a matter for an inquiry, surely. He presents Katie Simpson to the hospital claiming that she has committed suicide, and that is accepted by the police despite the fact that he has this history of abuse against Abigail Lyle and this allegation by Sarah, as we'll call her, from 2016. They accept the word of a domestic abuser in relation to what happened. I think doctors at the hospital didn't feel that the injuries to her neck looked as if they could have been caused by a hanging. And for months, Johnny Creswell was free in the aftermath of the murder of Katie Simpson. For a long time, he looked like he was going to get away with it. And even from those bail hearings, in advance of his own death by suicide, there is concerns that the prosecution don't have a strong enough case against him because of some of the investigative negligence.
Very much so. I remember one comment that the PPS were trying to push very hard for him not to be released, and the judge remarked, look, he may not be a nice guy, but I cannot keep him in jail just because of that. Now, even when all the previous issues and the absconding was thrown into the mix, it still wasn't enough. So much evidence must have been lost in those first months, so much. And what is very difficult to take is it's not like they weren't being told. It's not a case of simply saying, well, there's nothing on his record. That's irrelevant. A concern has been raised. What was wrong with ruling it out? There was simply no will, or I refuse to believe that there's anybody was lent on or anything like that. Something was lazy, or maybe there was a level of inexperience. I really don't know. I understand they probably didn't want to go in full blazing when a girl is alive but fighting for her life. They probably thought it was insensitive. But speaking for myself and the people I stood with, we watched that funeral in the hope the blue lights were coming, and they didn't come. As a matter of fact, nothing happened. Nothing happened. And that was a double blow, because we're sitting watching this man center stage act out this devotion for this girl. And we know, you did not need to be Sherlock Holmes to work this out. You could tell there were too many similarities. And even at that stage, we didn't know half the similarities. We were only working with a handful, but it didn't add up.
So, of course, Johnny Creswell took his own life one day into his trial for the murder of Katie Simpson, leaving behind so many questions unanswered. But the case against him, and the judge at his bail hearing pointed out, was going to have one big problem, and that was the fact that the prosecution did not have a cause of death for Katie.
Well, yes, but you don't have to have a cause of death to get a murder investigation. This is something that seems to have gone over the heads of a lot of people. In high office, I have to say, you don't have to know how a person died. You need to know that it was not what the presenting person has said. Take, for example, Charlotte Murray. There's no body, so nobody knows how Charlotte died. Nobody knows how she was murdered. But the man who did it is in jail for her murder. So it was always this thing that you had to have a body and you had to have a cause. It has to be not what was suspected or not what was suggested. And there was nothing about Katie's death that was adding up. I mean, for example, a hanging. Well, the neck breaks. And we're led to believe that Katie had been hanging for some time. So, it simply wasn't feasible. And then, the fact that it was all a turnaround of 4 or 5 minutes between him coming back, rescuing her, getting into the car to take her to hospital, it wasn't adding up. There were flags that an amateur could have seen that just they were overlooked. Whether he's a good actor enough that he fooled people into thinking, because I'm sure he was distressed, he probably thought, I'm sunk. Maybe he didn't, but either way, he carried it off and has the audacity to be with her at her side as she draws her last breath. And I often wonder, did he breathe a sigh of relief at that point, because she was never going to come back and tell what really happened.
And Tanya, what I can't understand, going back to the cause of death, for sure, in a situation where you don't have a body, somebody has gone missing, they're presumed murdered. For sure, if a body has lain, possibly outdoors for months on end, and, perhaps it's not a complete remains, etc. We don't have cause of death. But in this case, Katie Simpson was in a hospital medical environment. And I just cannot get my head around why there is no cause of death available in that scenario.
Her cause of death was pretty much global asphyxia. So she loses the cerebral, so lack of oxygen to the brain.
Right.
And then over time, I think there was an element of pneumonia crept in. But either way, what led to her death was her neck constriction. That was the strangulation. It starved her brain of blood. There was no brain activity. And the heart, which they did get restarted, was obviously stopped too long. And so what you have is what led to that death. If you're going to be blunt about it, everyone's cause of death is when your heart stops beating. It's what gets you to that point. And in Katie's case, it was the neck was so constricted that she clearly lost consciousness, and it was enough. She had not enough oxygen to the brain, and her system began to fail as a result.
And the complication here is that the pathology report states that it sort of leaves in question whether or not that was caused by hanging.
It did, but then as the High Court bail application took it, that was loosely based. The pathologist based that on Creswell's account of what happened. I mean, it's our understanding that the pathologist asked someone to ring him, took the details, and this is what he came back with, because it's the only scenario they had. But that's, to me, not a forensic autopsy where you go into every detail. And that wasn't done because, yes, there were photographs taken, but they were not remarked upon. I mean, this girl is battered black and blue.
And indeed, the judge at the bail hearing is incredulous by the fact that a pathologist would take a report from somebody as to what happened and use that. The judge appears to be quite taken aback by that and says it shouldn't happen.
It's exactly, and even the defence said it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So there's questions there too, but the whole issue of the pathology end, we're being told it was forensic, where others are saying, but it couldn't have been because they didn't record all the bruising and all the they didn't check every other angle. But when it was put, that's largely because of what Mr. Creswell told him. I just could not believe I'd heard that right. It was just, if that's what it is in a domestic, this is what happened, and who else have you got to tell you what happened because I found them? No, that should have been really explored. But as we found out recently, uniform officers were suspicious the day Katie died. They asked for CID input. That CID, Katie's died on the 9th, and the postmortem took place on the early part of the 11th. But on that day, CID do come in, find death not suspicious, and return it to uniform that night as suicide. 1 day. They take 1 day to look into this matter with all the concerns that had mounted up beforehand. And CID have 1 day. And we had to fight the PSNI to get that information out of them because they tried every angle to block us on those questions. They still will not answer us on who made that decision. We didn't ask the name, we asked the rank, and they won't provide it. They've now deemed that a vexatious question.
This story just seems to get more extraordinary as time goes on. But where is it at as regards calls for inquiries? Where is the Ombudsman's report at? And what else is going on at this point?
The Ombudsman inquiry is exactly where it was the last time we spoke. The PSNI have responded to the Ombudsman. Don't know what's going on with the respond. We don't know where it's going. And the Chief Constable made it clear at the last placing board meeting that he would not be discussing the case any further until such times as there is more information. As for an inquiry, are we going to get an inquiry? I would like to think so, but we can call for it, but everything's going to come back. Oh, we'll have to wait for this report. There are now further reports in with the Ombudsman over some of the senior investigating team and direct complaints as to activities that were carried out that were not carried out. These came after the murder trial, and they're all fresh investigations. So,
and how does your ombudsman work? Is a complaint made by a member of the public, for example, and given that there's been a number of different complaints made all around the one investigation, do they come back just with simply one, or do they answer each complaint separately, or do they come back with one sort of overall inquiry?
I think this time it's going to be individuals because they all have different complaints. The original one, there were several complaints made about police inaction. I was one of them, but I got lumped in with everybody else's. I still haven't had proper responses. I'm concerned about evidence going missing. I'm concerned about not being taken seriously. And I'm also concerned if it was because I was a member of the press, because I wouldn't like to think that I can't be a private citizen as well, and a concerned citizen at that. So, but I haven't got answers to that. And it's somewhere jumbled up within this report. And every time I've asked, you'll know whenever the report comes out. So I don't know. As for an inquiry, we'll keep shouting, but we're going to get pushed back continuously because we're waiting for these endless internal reviews to be carried out. And
so, I mean, you could be looking another few years, or are you thinking for the Ombudsman's report, or would you like to think less than that?
I'd like to think less than that. I do suspect this is a vast problem. I don't think really, again, you'd need to be Sherlock Holmes to work that out. This is vast. The knock-on of that is it the only one? Is this going to trigger a written branch review of all domestics, of all female deaths, of all deaths where there was a slight concern? This takes in so many agencies. It's impossible to put it all to one agency, which is the Ombudsman. It's going to have to bring in every agency under one umbrella. And it really, a public inquiry is the only way forward.
And I mean, wouldn't you think that the PSNI at this stage need to reassure the women of Northern Ireland that they are safe? Because, the way this has been handled, that a convicted abuser is the guy giving the narrative when a young woman of 21 is brought into a hospital, clinging to life with injuries, etc., and a history there of repeated hospital visits, which the same guy has been with her for. It feels like there's so many failings in it. It's not really inspiring confidence, is it, for people out there who might need to make complaints about domestic violence?
It's not a good sign at all. And I don't know, the police keep telling us that they're addressing their issues on violence against women and girls. But I also want to say there are also male victims in these instances. I try to keep a balance there because I'm speaking to a number at the minute in these situations, and they're very reluctant to speak out because it makes them feel weak. But it does happen. And the frightening thing is that if these people get away with a death or a very serious assault, they stay in control. So you cannot break coercive control if you don't get to the root of the issue. And that is a major problem. It was a major problem in Katie's case. It was a major problem that Sarah has come forward and said, I told them what he was like. I told them about his talk, his behaviour, his threats, his anger, all on the back of previous convictions. This is a man who did not learn and didn't want to learn. And the support network around him, for whatever reason, gave him the confidence to go on. How many times have people looked away at from the Johnny Creswells of this world and said, it's not my problem? Because it's everybody's problem. domestic abuse is everybody's responsibility, because we need to, I'm not saying you need to invade in people's lives, but if you know something, surely, rather than get a phone call to say someone you know has been murdered, and you're going to then spend your life saying, why did I not just even flag this? But that didn't happen. And secrets and silence, it's the only way I can describe it. It's not on my doorstep, move it on. But it is very much, it's an endemic problem, and it's frightening because domesticity, the very word suggests safety, closed safety. So when you're literally trapped in a silence with someone who has the power, and you know what they're capable of, where does that leave you? Do you just give up? Or do we try and address the issues here and say, right, that needs removed, that needs dealt with? I'm not saying it would have saved Katie, but how many women are going to die in these circumstances, and a person connected to them has carte blanche to dictate the circumstances of how it happened, in the knowledge that that could go on and happen again, and it will. Because I remember a judge saying that domestic abusers keep going. It's part of the perpetration. It's part of the prey.
And those around them that protect them are enabling them to do that.
Empowering them. The very idea of people turning away, I find that incredible. It wouldn't be easy to help out, or it wouldn't be easy to say something, but that's civic responsibility. Do you want a death? Do you want to would you not rather try and block it at that stage, or highlight it, rather than go through this horrendous 4-year battle for Katie, which is still far from over? I know which I'd prefer.
And as always, Tanya, anybody out there who is listening to this podcast who has any piece of information in this, what is still a jigsaw of Creswell's life and crimes, please do come forward. And even if anyone wants to come forward anonymously, they will do so in confidence. They can contact yourself, Tanya, or they can come through me. We are liaising all the time in relation to this story. And I think that there are still people coming all the time, aren't there? Still, feeling a little bit less afraid now to come forward. And the more information we get, the better a job we can do on this.
Absolutely. And yes, they are coming forward. It's difficult because they're raking up parts of their life that they had wanted forgotten, but they're now seeing themselves as part of a greater picture. Quite a frightening picture at that, but they're now saying that they weren't alone, that they can speak now, and they can say what happened. And it might add to the jigsaw. It might add things up. It might lay a trail that we can find out where these things went on, why they were allowed to get on. Something has to be done here, and there can be no more Katie Simpsons. There simply can't.
For sure. Well, Tanya Fowles, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Crime World, edited and presented by me, Nicola Tallant, co-presenter Niall Donald, produced by Ian Malini, art and design Enda Bulger, assistant producer Clodagh Meany, research assistant Nasa Comiskey, and audio editor Jason Malini. If you like this show and love true crime, follow and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, or subscribe and watch on our YouTube channel.